Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Tobias Mayer. We talked about his desire to be a writer, the Peter Principle, and finally about walking uphill. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and hello Tobias Mayer. Actually, is that how I should pronounce it, Tobias? Or?
Good enough. Yes, that works. Yeah, thank you. People pronounce it in various ways. Tobias, Tobias.
That's why I was asking, because I'm talking with people all around the world, and then it's always interesting. And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes I'm completely off. So that's but that is part of working
I
international.
like to embrace different pronunciations of my name. The way that people say it, it's always sometimes quite novel. Tobias, I've had as well. Tobias, Tobias, Tobias.
That's already interesting. And one of the questions you asked me just before we started was, where are you? And actually, I am here in Ghent in Belgium. And if we're asking Google Maps to zoom out, you see that we're moved to Sheffield, where Tobias is at this very moment. And on my side, it is a little bit over 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And for you, what time is it on your side?
It's 8:08.
So we see we're not that far away, miles. It's still across the ocean in a way, across the channel, like we say in Europe, and well, just one time zone away. So that's not that bad, but still early, I think, for both of us on a Saturday.
Mhm.
So, Tobias, before we start and jump into all these questions, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do people need to know, or who are you?
Well, I don't know who the listeners are going to be to this and how much information should I give, but this is called Who is Agile? And so I suppose that I should say when I first discovered the term in relation to software development, which was probably, I think I read the manifesto for Agile software development in something like 2003 was when I first came across it. The reason I came across it was I had come across extreme programming in 1998 when I was still studying and doing research on software process, and I just stumbled on a paper that was written about extreme programming. And what was interesting about the paper, it was a paper written to tell the readership of that particular journal why extreme programming could never work and why it was a terrible idea, and everyone should steer well away from it. And of course, with that information, I was attracted right up to it, and I thought, "What is this? This is really fascinating." And because I was kind of writing about software process, and this was a very different kind of process to building software, and it just sat beautifully with me. It resonated with me. It was the craftsmanship approach to something that had been taken away from craftspeople. So it just felt right. But when I eventually graduated and moved to the States and started working in the industry, I didn't get much chance to put it into practice. So it was always sort of in the background for me, and I read more about different methods of developing software, and learned a lot more about pairing as a technique, which interestingly, actually, I discovered that pairing was something Microsoft used to practice in the very early days. But they paired one tester and one developer. So it was a one-to-one relationship between testers and developers, and they worked sort of side by side. I don't know what happened to that idea in Microsoft, but it was one that sort of intrigued me. And the company I was at, we had that relationship. I had a tester that sat right next to me, and we worked through things together. So that was interesting. It was an XP. But then, so then I moved on to another company, and eventually was promoted to the position of a software development manager with a team of people. And I didn't really want that job. But I was assured that I would still be able to write code, which turned out not to be true at all. But then I was thinking, well, how do I manage these people? Because I've got no real experience of it, and most of them are much better than me at what they're doing, and they've been doing it longer. And then, I was on the list at that time on some of the extreme programming lists and extreme testing. That was the one I was on for some reason.
Mhm.
I've met Lisa Crispin at a conference, a testing conference, and was really impressed with the fact that I'd met a person who wrote a book. And I remember it was very memorable for me meeting Lisa. And so I was following her writing and some of the groups and things. And then I started hearing about this thing called Scrum, and I had no idea what it was. And so then I read more about that, and at the same time I came across the Agile Manifesto. And of course, again, that resonated really well with me. I remember printing it out and sticking it on the side of my cubicle in the company that I worked with, and I had a program manager, project manager that I worked with at the time, and he would come by and he'd look at it and he would just sort of shake his head. And I said, "Well, you don't like it?" He said, "Well," he said, "it's good in parts, but it's never going to catch on." It was that sort of attitude. So the more that I kind of heard this resistance towards things like extreme programming and agile from people, then I liked them. It was people I liked, but I just thought there are better ways of working than this, and it just, so it kind of, that's where I came across it. So that's my background. My background is as a software developer, but I started being a software developer when I was 40, I suppose. When I was 36, I went to university for the first time and studied software engineering. And then when I graduated, like I said, I moved to the States coincidentally, but I happened to sort of end up in Silicon Valley in 1999, and it was a good time to be working in that industry. But prior to that, I'd done all kinds of other work. So I'm not a sort of childhood geek, with a computer at the age of 11, like a few
And
colleagues.
and you're one of the people in the agile industry. I assume you know, but I just can't resist the joke that has a wiki page, a
Uh,
page on Wikipedia, which unfortunately for you is not about you, but about someone else who has
isn't
more.
that lovely? Yeah, he's a bit of a hero, actually. He's one of the people that solved the longitude problem, isn't he, Tobias Mayer? He has a lake on the moon named after him. So yeah, but of course his real name is Johannes, I believe. So it's Johannes Tobias Mayer. So it's
Yeah, so it's not exactly the same, but it's interesting that yeah, I remember a couple of years ago when I was looking for your book because you talked about talking with someone who wrote a book, but you wrote a book as well a couple of years ago, and I remember looking at trying to find it at the moment that I wanted to buy it, and then say, wait, he's Wikipedia. Oh no, it's someone else. So it
yeah.
was kind of funny at that moment.
It's funny. You say a couple of years ago. It's actually 10 years ago that book was published. So it's time flies, doesn't it? A couple of years.
Indeed, indeed, time flies. I wanted to let's. We've already kind of jumped into that in all kind of directions, which I like. That's a very interesting way to start. Let's go to that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Or maybe they didn't know that I was 40 when I had my first software development job. I think I was 40. Yeah, I was 39, late 39, just turning 40. Um, so maybe that's something people don't know. Well, I mean, I'm
I
sure.
didn't know when you were just talking about it. I
Yeah,
didn't know.
yeah. Um,
What attracted you actually to go into software at that moment?
well, yeah, it was sort of accidental, really. I was working in the helping profession, so I was working for government training programs, helping people get back into work, and quite a lot of work with young people who were excluded from school. And I had this job that, for the first time in my life, required me to use a computer to write reports. Prior to that, I'd done everything by hand. I had no idea. Never really touched a computer. Didn't know anything about it. I just started to get interesting. I remember using. I'd come across computers before, and they'd never attracted me. But this was a computer that had Windows 3.1 on it, and it was very attractive to look at, and it had the whole WYSIWYG thing going, and I had some background in graphic design and had been a graphic designer for a few years in the more distant past. Um, and the idea that I could do layout on a computer was fascinating to me. That because in the past it had all been printing things out and sticking them down with cow gum or hot wax or something. So it was very physical, and the idea that we could do this on. So I began to get attracted towards it, and then I started to wonder how it works, and I happened to have a student working at the company at the time who knew a bit about programming, and he said, "Oh, you can program in QBasic on a DOS machine," and so he kind of like introduced me to that. And I just got hooked.
Ah,
It was once you learn programming, and it's for some of us, it just becomes a second nature or something. It felt like where I belonged. And I'd been
mm,
wandering, 35 years of life without really having a place to go. And it was my place. And so I just pursued it, and that's where I applied. I was married at the time. I was just had my first son, actually, in 1994. And
and so then you start learning programming, which is could be some kind of addiction, especially if you
yeah,
jump into in the beginning. It can take a lot
yeah.
of time.
Do you know
Same
what
with
I loved about it, though?
university.
What I
Oh,
loved about it, it felt to me like writing poetry. And
ah,
I took great care about the style of the way that I wrote the code. And I remember like printing it out and sticking it on the walls around the room because I liked the look of the code. I thought the code looked attractive. It was sort of like an artwork slash
ah,
poem or something. And the more I read about it, and the more I was reading about some of the early hacker communities, I read Stephen Levy's book quite early on. I love that book, by the way, Hackers. And that's another book I could probably recommend. You asked for a recommendation.
mm,
Hackers by Stephen Levy is absolutely wonderful. The history of computing, basically. But he, in one of the parts there, he talked about there was a sort of ongoing competition among some of the early programmers to write in as few lines or as few instructions as possible, and to really get their programmers into, like removing a single character almost and getting it as short as you could possibly do. And it reminded me of haiku writing. The idea of saying
mm.
expressing so much in so few words, and these programmers were, to me, they were poets. And they were great inspiration in that sense. So that was
Well,
part of
the programmers before, of course, they had to watch out for memory at that moment, and
it.
so that was at that moment there was a little less, but definitely the years before, programming every character that you could remove was better in a way because we were limited in memory. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting to make that link between haiku. So
yeah.
that's it.
And also, when I did go, I went to South Bank University, for those that know it, in London. It was one of the old technical colleges that got renamed as a university. So it's quite a sort of very hands-on sort of place. But we had some wonderful teachers there, and all of the coding I learned was object-oriented code. And there was something about the style of writing OO code that was also quite beautiful. The structures of things, the way that things were named. And again, it sort of brought out that poetry element. It was almost like you were telling a story with the code. And I remembered from the extreme programming book when they talked about metaphor, system metaphor, and how important that was. And it was very much like, we're going to write this code, but what we're really doing is we're telling a story. And so it tied in my love of literature and my desire to be a writer, I suppose, as well, because I wasn't really writing anything back in the old days. I only became a writer. I say a writer, I mean, I write articles and blogs and things. I'm not a novelist, but I started writing more after I started coding, which is interesting. I've never made that connection before, actually. But yeah.
Yeah, but like you say, the whole craft of creating a software was really important in especially in extreme programming and the whole community around that. And I can definitely see how that. I remember I've read a few books about crafting just before, but really a lot about that book yeah, it also turned me on to the whole style of writing and the whole making. Yeah, that's.
Which book, Eve? Which one are you talking
I,
about?
I was talking about the extreme programming book.
Oh, the extreme
And
programming book itself. Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, there were other books like the extreme program book is not that thick. There was a book that I was a big fan about just a couple of years before was Code Complete, which is a very thick book from a person that
yeah. I
I
know
think
that.
at that time worked at Microsoft. There's a by now multiple versions of that book. I can't come up with the
Yeah.
name. Steve something.
Well, the one that attracted me in the before coming across the XP one is the book that when you said, can you recommend a book? I went right back to my early days of inspiration, and I found Robert Glass's book, which went out of print for a while and then came back in print with a foreword by Tom DeMarco. Um, but it's a beautiful book, and I think it sows the seeds of a lot of what grew out of that in the agile world as well. So it's
So
an
that's this book that you're talking about, right?
That's the book. Yeah, it's come out with a different cover now, but I love that original design. Love it. Love that cover design. And he compares. He's got this comparison between what he calls the Roman and the Greek approach to software development, and
Mm.
it's really interesting in that the Greek approach is much more aligned with XP approaches, and the Roman approach is this sort of top-down bureaucratic approach to writing software. And I mean, in the book, Robert Glass explores process and people, and really, I would say he comes down quite strongly on the side of people over process. It's very clear, and that's the message in there. And again, for me, that was an inspiring book, because although I was studying software process while I was learning to be a software engineer, none of it really made sense to me. This whole thing with learning how to put Gantt charts together and stuff. I said, well, what happens if it doesn't go that way? What happens if you don't get to this milestone? And there was no
Yeah,
real.
you have to. Yeah, that you, back in these days, it was sometimes kind of strange how people were actually trying to run projects that way, and it felt, well, at least to me, but probably
Yeah.
just to you and many
The
others, very,
thing
very.
about it, Eve, it had a huge appeal to me. The idea of being able to design this big structure that would just like make everything fall into place. There was something in itself that was quite beautiful about that. It was kind of creating an architecture or an art form that was just it was gonna work, because it had been thought out so carefully. And even though I knew it wouldn't and it couldn't, I still would like it to, So I was
I
attracted to
think that's the hard part about it. It's
it. Is.
so yeah.
Yeah,
Let's bring some structure into the chaos, and then yeah, these damn programmers, they just have to follow the rules and have to just do it like that, and yeah,
yeah,
kind
exactly.
of strange. We already moved into actually a completely different kind of question after the first one, but let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, what would have become of you? And in a sense, you've already talked a little bit about that you accidentally went into software and a little bit before. But were there even before all of that things that you, for example, you were destined to become when you were young?
I had no idea, to be honest. I really had no idea for most of my life what I wanted to do or what I was drawn to. Um, and so I sort of flitted around a lot. I spent a few years doing. Um, I studied to be a dancer when I
Wow.
first left school. Yeah, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. That was my desire, but I just didn't cut the mustard for that one. Because I don't have the perfect dancer's body, so it's always going to be a struggle. And after 2 or 3 years of trying and going to professional dance school, I decided to drop out and focus on technical theatre. So I became very interested in lighting design and
Mm.
stagecraft, and so I was encouraged by one of my tutors there to kind of pursue that, and I did, and I got some work doing that for a while, on and off over the years, and
That's a
that, and
completely different profession than software.
it's complete. Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, and it was the early days of computer boards for lighting design, so you could kind of
Mm,
pre-program your designs, and you had very light touch. So that was kind of a connection, I suppose. But I liked it when it was more manual, really. But and then from there, I also did graphic design for a few years, just sort of like self-taught, and worked with people who were better than me and just got good at that. And I worked in a publishing. I moved to Australia for a while, and I had some work in a publishing company, very small company that grew very fast. So I found myself in a position of being a manager of other graphic designers there. I think that's where I learned how to, and when I became manager of a software company, I had the same approach. It was like recognizing that uh, other people were better than me at doing this work.
mm,
And I think that's a real gift for a manager to have. And I've worked with a lot of managers that are also not as good as I was, or not as good as the other people were, but don't recognize it. And it's painful
mm.
to see, because they've got this facade they have to put on, and this bluster, and they have to be very controlling and commanding, and because there's a fear underlying it that they're going to get found out. And I had that fear that I was going to get found out, and I just had to expose it straight away. Actually, I'm not that great. I think you're better than me at this kind of thing. And then it was, then it became more like managing more like a scrum master might support a team. And I had one person who was a good model for that in the company that I was working in.
That's a very interesting way of looking into that, because indeed, yeah, many managers might get the job because they were good at it at some point, and but if even if you're very good, and if you're a couple of years in management, you're not that practiced anymore. You don't know the details anymore.
Yeah,
Whatever product that you're making, and then letting it go is something that is really hard for many people.
get out of
And so
touch.
what I'm hearing is that you kind of, because you already sensed it probably rather early in the job, you basically made it your trademark in a way. You say, okay, I'm you do your job, I do mine, you're better in your job, let me help you in, yeah, a coaching style or whatever, but organizing the work of the others. Is that how I should
Well, I think
hear
so. Yeah,
it?
that's about what it felt like. That's all I could do. What was interesting, what you're describing there, and I think this is true across the corporate world, is there's a sort of ridiculousness to it. Well, it's not. Is it irony? It might be irony. I spent, if you like, 4 years training to be a software developer, including a year of of research in that. But um, and then I became quite good at doing it, and I was, so I got this job, and I'm very good at the work I'm doing, and I'm good at talking to people, and working with management and stuff. And so they say, oh, this person should be a manager. Right, so they make me a manager, which resulted in me not being a coder anymore. So the thing I'd studied for 4 years to do and was really good at, they said, stop doing that and do this new thing that you've never done before, you've never been trained for, and we'll send you on a half-day management training. And now we're going to expect you to be a good manager. And it's just nonsense, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying that I should go and study management for 4 years, but um, uh, you, you promote people
Mm.
away from their competence. It's the what's it called, principle at work, isn't it?
Peter principle,
Peace
yeah.
principle. Yeah, yeah.
It's
I didn't
and
quite get to my level of incompetence. I do want to say that. I could have done though if I'd stayed.
but
Yeah.
that's indeed the interesting thing. And for many in many companies, there is no kind of career ladder for software engineers. It's like, oh well, it's something like you start as a junior, then after a year or two, they already talk about being a senior, because yeah, otherwise we can't have anything else. And then yeah, either you become an
Architect
architect
cool.
and an enterprise architect, but if you're not interested in that part, you become a manager. If that's either the two directions, but just having a way to become a better engineer and just sticking to writing code, for many people, they would love to stay there, but for whatever reason, many companies don't think enough about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad.
I know I've had people who've gone back to doing that after being in a management position or a scrum master position, say, I don't, or a product owner position, say, I don't actually want to do this. I just want to write code. I enjoy it. And so I encourage them to go back and do that. You don't have to climb a career ladder. People used to ask me when I first discovered Scrum and I was introducing it to this organization I was at, one of the key questions people would say was, it's a sort of what's in it for me question. I mean, some people literally use those words, but it was like, what's the career path for a Scrum Master? And I said, I have no idea. Whatever you want it to be. You don't have to have someone else make your path for you. You can choose it. And you might go sideways, you might go backwards, or maybe there's no up and no down. It's whatever you want to make of it. But now people had a hard time with that. So now the career path for a Scrum Master is, first you're a Scrum Master for teams, then you're a Scrum Master for multiple teams, then you're an Agile coach, then you're an enterprise Agile coach, and then you're the Chief Agile Officer for and it just gets ridiculous. Only because people have this desire that's forced on us through the corporate cultures that we live in, that you have to have a career path, otherwise your job is a dead-end job.
Which is kind of ridiculous, and you're a nice example of it, because you moved in your 40s into a completely new direction, and actually moved again in other directions. And I had many people here that talk about accidental careers where you move in all kind of directions. And I have children who are now in the early 20s thinking about, I have to choose the best direction in at university because my whole life depends on it. It's like, it's an interesting and an important choice, but your whole life doesn't depend on it. It's, or not, for most people, I see many people moving in all kind of directions. Which is, for me, I think it's smarter if something doesn't fit you, try something else and see where that brings you. And you might go back. And in a sense, when you say you were a manager of these graphic designers and then managers again of software teams, it's a similar kind of job with, for a completely different set of people. But I assume these two jobs had influence on each other, or the first one had influence on the second one.
I mean, all of the, I've had so many different jobs. I should write it down one day, about just list the different kind of weird jobs that I've had over the years. Until I went to to university, I can't honestly say I had a career. I never had a career. I just had jobs, and one thing took me into another. And I might go back, like after years of not doing any theatre work, I sort of found myself doing it again, working for a drama school for 4 years as a technician, and or a designer, technician, stage manager, so it's sort of a back and forth thing. The thing is, I used to have this idea that we should follow our dreams, right? But I never had particularly great dreams, so I didn't have much to follow. And also, I'm suspicious.
Or you were not that good at the dreams, because you talked about being a dancer and said, okay, I realized that at some point I lacked some parts for being that recognized in the role, I would say.
Yeah, but there's, sometimes one has to just work to earn a living, and it's not about finding the perfect job or following your dream. You just have to get a job, and I think the secret is just enjoying whatever it is you happen to be doing. When I think back on some of the jobs that I've had, I worked at McDonald's twice in my life. One time it was a horrible experience, but the first time I worked there, it was a wonderful experience, and I have wonderful memories of working at McDonald's for almost a year, while I was studying dance, actually. But that was my income, and it was just quite a joyous experience. And the people that worked there were great, and it was in a nice part of London. So it, but people say that what a horrible job you have to, to have that, you have to do that and wear that stupid uniform, and but it's a great memory, and another time in between software jobs, when I was when the whole .com bubble burst, I was working as a roof cleaner. So I would,
Wow.
it was with a pressure washing thing and cleaning people's roofs, cleaning the roofs of all the rich people who still had jobs, and being looked at like I was a nothing. I was, I was nobody,
Mm.
and I was just like an assistant to the guy that ran the company. But that was a lovely job as well, and the three of us who did it, we had a great time. And so it's about,
And
for me, joy
that's
of
the
work,
thing.
you know.
Exactly, and it's always interesting how people look down or look up at other people because of their jobs, because of things, and maybe the people who are, I don't know, that we don't expect to work still in McDonald's if they're a little bit older might be because of a layoff, because of something else, and maybe because in their life at that moment, or maybe because, for example, they're studying again at a certain age and they need
Yeah,
some kind of income.
yeah.
It's yeah, I find it always fascinating how people react to what other people do and think, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, you
I know
can.
it is interesting, isn't it? But people have that way of looking. When I remember telling someone that when I it was, in my early days of being a software developer and telling someone about it, she sort of looked at me and said, "Wouldn't shouldn't you be doing something artistic with your family background?" And
Hmm.
I just felt like you don't know what you're talking about. Why would you assume that the work I do is not artistic? What a strange assumption to make, and why I looked down. It was looking down on it, very much so, because I've got, my family are painters and sculptors and things like that. So she thought, well, you should be one too. But I was, in my eyes, I was one. I was a poet.
Hmm.
I was a software poet.
That yeah, that's really wonderful with the way you describe it, and the way when you look at it, and that's really the real thing. You should be happy and you should be doing a job where that brings you something, and it could be joy, and it could be just money, and it could be anything. It could be, okay, it brings me to friends or some
Yeah.
other kind of thing. So that's let's move to that third question. What do you consider your biggest challenge or the biggest challenge right now, and why is that a good thing for you?
I did have an answer for that one. Um, Parenting and relationships. I wrote down. That's always been challenging, for me. Uh, and why is it good for me? I think that was the second part of the question, wasn't it?
Mhm. Yes.
Um, I think both of them act as mirrors. I see my faults. I see my good parts too, my assets, but I very clearly see my faults in reflected in the people I'm close with. I see my behaviors. I see my behaviors echoed by my children, and I see what I think I don't like the way they're doing that, and then I have to stop and think, why
Oh,
are they?
damn it.
Yeah, God damn it, yeah. And so that's the aspect.
Why do children always pick their bad parts and not our good parts when they copy our
I
behavior?
know. I think I think they do in the end.
Yeah, we notice much easier the negative part, I would say, but yeah,
Yeah.
but I really like the how you talk about it. Indeed, it's the reflection that we see, and of course we either for relationships we pick someone who might be close to us for certain reasons, and then have other traits that are similar to ours that we might not even like about ourselves, and that that is challenging. But I
Yeah.
really like that you indeed you say it's actually more a mirror about who we are ourselves or how we look into the world. And so when you say that this is yeah, this is the heart and the beautiful part, knowing that, well, that you care about people and interactions with whatever we do in Scrum and in Agile. Um, are there any things that you've learned from these relationships or from these people around you on that you could use in work? Is there anything that you
Oh,
say?
yeah, so much. I mean, I'm frequently telling anecdotes in my classes about my interactions with my children. Ranging from using the cleaning your room as an example of definition of done for for one thing, and just
It
saw it.
definitely can be different between a 16-year-old and the parent looking into that.
Yeah, but I mean, apart from the, sort of the obvious comparisons like that, it's all it's a continuous process of learning, isn't it? And we talk about continuous learning, continual learning in our industry, and about how important that is. And as soon as I get complacent, I'm going backwards. There's a lovely phrase about that. It's when people say, oh, how's your life? I say, I'm cruising. And the response to that, well, you're probably going downhill then. Life should be a little bit of work sometimes. It should be. Yeah, when I injured my back recently, and I had a hard time walking, I found a lot of pleasure in walking uphill, but I found walking downhill a real struggle. And I thought there's something in that, something important in that. So there's something about the trudge, I suppose, when you're going uphill that has, when you get there, there's a feeling of achievement and something. I don't get that when I'm walking downhill.
I,
It's
I, I remember my parents talking. I don't remember what, I don't know what age. It's somewhere between 5 and 10 or something like that. That they said that when I was walking with them, that for whatever reason it was easier for me to walk uphill than downhill. Indeed, I enjoyed much more the hard work of going up than the downhill part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a runner, when you run, I find running down a steep hill really, really difficult. You've got to hold yourself back so much, but running uphill, you can push forward. So I don't know. There's something in that. I don't know what it is, but
Yeah, going downhill, it indeed you have less control over the speed, or you have to use whatever to do to avoid that you go too fast. Where uphill is actually more like, okay, I want to go faster, or
yeah.
not. But downhill is always like, indeed, and if that's the same with a bicycle or just running,
Mm.
it's, I like that that whole metaphor. We're back to metaphor.
It's a nice one to play with, isn't it? I think. I don't know, if it has any particular meaning. I mean, most metaphors, they are what you make of them, right? But there's something about that uphill, downhill struggle that became very pertinent for me when I was injured, and and the fact I wanted to exercise, and my exercise took me uphill. In fact, what I would often do is I would take my scooter. I have a kick scooter, not one of the motorized ones. And I would take my scooter with me so I could walk uphill and then just ride downhill, so I didn't have to walk down the hill because it was too painful. So that was an interesting way of getting exercise too.
I want to go back a little bit about what you say in your Scrum training and in other trainings, that you use examples from your family. Is there a particular reason why you're not using examples of development teams?
Um, I do occasionally use those, but when I'm teaching Scrum in particular, I'm trying to get the idea across that Scrum is a completely natural way of operating in the world when we have unknowns. So the what I call it the a pattern for creative making. That's what Scrum is. It's a pattern for creative making. And by abstracting the pattern out from all of the terminology that we use in Scrum and showing people this is how you operate in the world when you're doing most things, like when you're cooking a meal, when you're raising children, when you're gardening, when you're decorating your home, when you're doing the housework, even when you're learning something new. And if you're at school or you're learning a language or a musical instrument, you're practicing Scrum in its kind of raw creative form. And so in order to get that idea across, I have to pull examples from the day to day. I use examples of cooking a dinner party, or getting a wedding dress made is always a nice one.
Mm.
Which is sort of bringing in the idea of a cross-functional team and the continuous checking in with fittings and things. It's learning as you go, incrementally improving, making sure you talk to your customer on a regular basis. And
Well,
so,
and I can imagine most people that want a wedding dress, they want a unique dress. They don't want to be
yes, yeah,
the same dress that their sister or whatever wore.
right,
And in that sense, you'd have to be very specific talking to the customer. Of course, I really like that.
yeah,
I will ask the question because I like to do some similar stuff, and for me, there is another reason that is very much linked to what you say behind is that when I give examples about development and or companies, the default reaction I get from people, and I wonder if that's the same with you, is like this won't work because we're different, blah blah blah.
yeah.
And I'd say give like I'm using examples completely outside of your thing. I assume that we're all adults and that you can translate that back to whatever works for you. And that gets people into the searching mindset, like, okay, what parts apply to me? Is that something that you recognize as well, or is that
It is very much so, Yves. Yeah. Um, when you start to give very specific examples, as you're saying, people will shut it down through that response. Well, that's different. We're not like that. Our company's different. We don't do that kind of work. And so the more you can take it away from very specific work situations, the less people can do that. Because what you're doing, I think, when you're talking about your family or some experience of mountaineering or something, whatever it happens to be, you're bringing people into a story. You're inviting them into your story, and they can't criticize it. And they can't say it's wrong or it's not like that, because it is like that for you, because that's exactly what it was like. And you're just saying, come along with me in this story. You're not saying, hey, do it like this. So when you're giving an example from a software company, say, hey, these guys did this, you could do this too. And that's when the barriers come up and say, no, 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 we're not like that. Because you're
mm.
trying to force something on people who aren't ready for it. This is
But
why,
even if we're telling a story about the company as an example, somehow people are still thinking in it. It's
yeah,
very
I
interesting.
haven't really given it a lot of thought, to be honest, but I think, now that you're talking about it that way, I think that's what it is. It's almost as if we're saying, you ought to do this too, because they did it. This team did this, or
Mm.
they built software in this way, or they had this relationship with their customer. And
Yeah, I recognize that with I like to do a lot of pair teaching or pair coaching or whatever we call it. And what I've noticed is that if I tell two stories and I say, okay, this is one way, this is another way, people still seem to stick with one of my stories or not at all. If I do it with someone else and I say story one and someone else says story two, and this is how I do it, it kind of invites people to, oh, I should make up my own story, and they
yeah,
typically
yeah,
take a third story. And I like that's one of the things I like in pair teaching is that we kind of contradict each other and say, well, for me this is this and that's that. But I can't do that on my own. If I do that on my own, somehow people still seem to pick my ideas, which is the opposite of what I want.
yeah.
And with
I hear
stories,
you on that. And I think that I've got some experience of that too. That one of the reasons I love having a second person in my classes, to a second teacher, if you like, and I've been doing a lot more of that recently, is because I want people to get the idea that this way of working is not prescriptive. It's not that I can't tell you how to do this work. I can just tell you what the structures are. But the stories that I tell, and then I'll say, but that's my experience, and so is going to have a different one of that. And then they, like exactly as you're describing, you hear these two very different takes on, how to implement the same idea, perhaps. And then people are like, well, yeah, then they have to come up with their own, don't they? Because they don't know which one to choose.
exactly.
Yeah,
And yeah, and usually they choose neither of them. And if I do it myself, somehow that doesn't resonate. That yeah, they say, okay, that you give me two ideas how you do it, so I should pick one of your two ideas.
yeah,
But already very very interesting conversations. We're moving in all kind of directions. And well, I think you're known for being a very passionate person, a person that really if you have an idea, a value, you might even go against some of the things that are happening. So do you know where that drive, where that passion is coming from? What drives that?
Uh, so I've definitely got a sort of a rebellious spirit. All right. So I like from when I was at school, even I never really liked school, and I got out as soon as I left school at 16. I think just when I was done. You know, I didn't want to do it, and I didn't spend much time at school when I was there. And one of the things I noticed while I was at school is when people would tell me a rule, so yeah, something I had to do, and I would ask why, I would never get an answer. I would be told not to be cheeky or to, you know, just to do
Mm.
it anyway and get on with it. And so I think that that need to make sense of things is quite strong in me. I can't just sort of take someone's word for something. I suppose I have to experience it or something, or have some really good understanding of the why. I'm not great at just following instructions, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. I think that I could do better sometimes in life if I was a bit more of a disciple, and a bit less of a rebel. But it does seem to be part of my makeup, and so I think in many ways it serves me.
And do you know, is there anything that triggered that? Is that something that you saw in your family, or if you want to talk about it, if you know, there's.
I don't in particular think, but I think that my father in particular did encourage all of us to, you know, challenge authority and to ask questions. It was very much encouraged, you know, trying to balance it with like follow the rules. You know, you're supposed to go to school, so go to school. Don't spend your days sitting by a river in the countryside, which is basically what I was doing a lot of the days. He said you need to be in school. It's the, you know, that's the agreement. But he was still encouraged me to kind of confront different ways of thinking. I'll give you an example of that, which I really like. Um, the kids at school, well, you know, the school system, rewards and punishments is built on all of that, isn't it? So you get these results, you get your grades at the end of the term or whatever. And the kids who would get, you know, A's, they would come into school with stories about the gifts that their parents had bought them for achieving an A in this or an A in that. And I wasn't getting any of this. So I said to my dad, I said, look, I got, you know, it's 3 A's in my last report. Shouldn't I be getting a reward like these other kids are getting? And he said, no. He said, that is the reward. He said, if you get an E or an F, I'll give you a gift because you'll need it. You know, so the A is the reward. You don't have to be rewarded for getting a reward. And I always thought there's such a different way of looking at the system, than we were encouraged to look at. You know, you do well, you get rewarded. Um,
Mm.
saying something?
Yeah, I've once heard the story that the best way to teach children to read a book is when they finish the book to give them another book as a kind of gift, as a way to say, okay, that's good. Now you can something else instead of giving gifts for reading pages or whatever. No, make sure that the book or the gift itself is another book to
Yeah.
encourage again. A little
Well,
bit in that
that
sense.
brings
The
to mind.
A.
That brings to mind. If we're talking about books to recommend, I'm going to recommend another book based on that, which is a book by Alfie Cohen, Kohn, called "Punished by Rewards." And you may know that book.
Yeah, I love it very much.
"Punished by Rewards" is a wonderful book. Yeah, Alfie Cohen.
Trying to look at it. It's somewhere there behind me.
You got it in there, yeah. He's an educator, but he's also got an awful lot to teach the people in the corporate world. Punished
Oh
by Rewards.
yeah, it's yeah. I've given a presentation with Vera Peters at XP Day London. I don't know, back in 2008 or something like that. Indeed, based on the whole curve
Yeah.
that Koen wrote about. Because yeah, everything that is about rewarding people inside companies, and then the whole whatever curve they want to use, that actually is blocking people from working together, basically.
It blocks people from
Uh,
working together, yeah. And it also it has this result when you have a reward system in place. It never makes people happy. It only makes people unhappy. Almost it's almost completely true that no one is happy, even if the ones that get the high reward, they think they deserve it, because we all think we deserve the high reward, and so
Yeah, and
the ones who
we
get
want
it
more, and
right
yeah.
also will get that, and then the ones who don't get it are angry and upset and hurt and want to leave the company. I'm not appreciated here, so it causes the worst kind of behaviors and dysfunction. It's terrible, terrible thing.
He has a similar kind of book on parenting,
Oh,
unconditional parenting.
unconditional parenting is that even more than punished by rewards actually influences the way that I try to show up. Unconditional
Mm.
parenting is beautiful. Yeah, yeah.
It's yeah, and this is interesting because these are not agile books, and at the same time they're so agile in the sense that they're talking about, yeah, treating people like humans, and then you get better results in a way, and you get better humans in one way or another. It's yeah, I'm not surprised that you like that book. I see many people loving that book. It's sometimes a little bit different, difficult with his with these books that he wrote, is that I find when I originally read them, I should probably read them back again because they're like almost 20 years old.
Mm,
um, but he talks a lot about what doesn't work, and I had a difficulty finding answers on what does work, especially around parenting, because I read them when I was when my children were still young.
yeah.
But it's a little bit like with Scrum and Agile. It's not prescriptive, and so there are no best answers in a way, which was frustrating for me as a young parent, I would say.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? It's when you recognize what breaks things, though, you can at least avoid that. It's like the question that I get asked sometimes by managers. The question is, how do I motivate my people? Right. And I have no idea, right? I don't think you can actually motivate other people. But my response to it is to ask them to look at what they're currently doing that might be demotivating their people, and stop doing it. If you stop demotivating people, they will naturally become motivated because their innate motivation will surface. But we can't make
And get out of their way, and yeah,
it
it's
out of the way. So it's a bit like that Alfie Cohen approach. It's like if you just have to stop doing this other stuff and then see what happens, and then allow it to emerge, and use your imagination, and be led by the people you're working with.
I have a nice story about that. I went to a training from Jim and Michelle McCarthy for the core protocols. I'm not
Oh
sure
yeah,
if you know them.
I do know.
And in part of that training, we were so it's a lot. You need to create something with a team, and a lot is about indeed creating a team and learning stuff. And there were I think we were a group of 20, and like 4 or 5 were really like me, really wanted to make it and whatever. Then there's a couple of others who went along and did pretty well, and there were a few like, yeah, they were against, they didn't like it and whatever. And so at some point I remember going out of the room, going back to the trainers and kind of complaining, because how do we motivate these people and it doesn't work and blah blah blah. And they're like, yeah, you can't motivate exactly what you're saying.
Mm,
And there was so simple things that need to be done and nothing got done. And I remember basically being told like, okay, you have to trust them and things. And remember feeling grumbled like, yeah, but they're not motivated. Why are they even here? And blah, blah, blah. And we come back in the room and they were actually busy doing the thing that we were doing before and that we wanted them to help with. And I realized at that time I was the one complaining and being grumbled and trying to drag them in, and that was pushing them out. And by just going out of the room, they were doing what I was hoping they would do and do it so much better than I could do. And I was like, oh, damn it, they were right. It was actually me. And I was so like, damn it. And that happened all in less than 10 minutes. The grumbling was going on for more than an hour before I started to say, okay, let's go outside to these trainers and ask something. And I was really like, yeah, it can be that simple. Getting out of the
A lovely
room.
story. Yeah, that is a lovely story. It's just getting out of the way, isn't it, sometimes? And yeah, I learned
Yeah,
that with
it
too.
it influenced me a lot with after that, is that sometimes we indeed have to get out, and sometimes just being in the room and thinking, I can't push them, I can't push them, I sit around, but still probably my whole body senses and shows like I want you to do that, and just getting out of the way creates room. It's hard as a parent, as a manager, as a coach, whatever, because of course we see certain things and we want certain things to happen, but getting out of the way and sometimes literally going out of the room has helped me a lot. So,
Yeah, I like that. That's a nice story. That really is. Yeah, yeah. Big
yeah,
learning in a
hard
small
one.
moment.
Exactly. Well, talking about learning and talking about achievements, what do you consider your biggest achievements so far? And actually, well, the question below is that this is your moment to brag. Is it easy for you to brag?
To brag?
Yeah.
No.
What are you proud of? Is that easy for you to be proud of certain
Uh,
things?
I don't. Not especially. No, no. Um, I mean, I've been told that I can be quite unpleasant as a person to argue with or to interact with because I'm quite dogmatic. I think I quite someone I know put it in a nicer way for me. She said, "Whatever you care about enormously."
Mm.
And so you get passionate and want to share that thing, but it comes across as like I'm right, you're wrong, and I don't want it to, but it does, and I am aware of that. By the way, if anyone's laughing, but I still do it. I'm aware of it, and I still do it. You
But
know,
you still have that passion. You have that passion, and you
yeah,
care about certain thing, and you care enough about it that you want to, yes,
yeah. But
help.
it's not a bragging thing. You say, "Do I brag?"
Mm,
I don't have much to brag about, to be honest. I don't. I haven't achieved any great things in the world. I didn't, co-write the manifesto for agile software development. I haven't written a great novel. Um, I don't have a Wikipedia page of my own. So what is there to brag about? So no, I'm not really someone who wants to brag. There's nothing to brag about. I'm quite happy um, doing what I'm doing. I enjoy the work I do, and that's why I do it. And I feel very blessed actually that I am able to do what I do and to be well paid for it. And whenever I get any kind of sense of disgruntlement, oh, life's annoying, or I don't want to have to, why do I have to work this weekend or something? I have to stop myself and just remember how much of a blessing it all is, and do a little bit of count your blessings kind of idea, because it's very easy to fall into complaint um, for all of us, I think, isn't it? And forget that, all of us in this industry, we are all so privileged. It's unbelievable, actually, when you compare it to, the rest of the people in the world. We are the 1%, above the
mm.
1%, probably. And when you remember that, it gets things into perspective a little bit as well.
Yeah, well,
Brings
the
out some.
interesting part is we're hired, or in many cases we're hired to help out companies, help out teams, whatever, to make things better. But that still is in an industry that where there is a lot of money around, where we do live in a part of the world where we do have enough food on the table, where we have electricity and Wi-Fi, even whatever else.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that we sometimes do forget, indeed, that there are other people having it a lot harder. Um, yeah, and I've noticed that there is tempting. You talked earlier about the rewarding system, and people feel like they're it's normal, and it's. I think in our industry, you also find a lot of things normal, which are actually completely not normal and very privileged compared to other parts of the world, I would say.
Yeah.
I want to move to that next tip about a question about a personal agility tip. And I know you have lots of opinions, lots of things. Is there anything that you say that is really something that people should try out?
I'm not quite sure
Or
what you
that
mean by
you do?
personal agility tips. Some principle of
I explicitly don't define it because I hope that that way it brings much more diversity in the type of answers. And some people do it about teamwork, others do it about their housework and whatever. So, is there anything that you do that you find interesting enough to talk about?
well, I think one of the things that this idea of continuous reflection, I think, is vital. Now, long before I came across agile and the idea of retrospective, came across the concept of personal daily reflection in 12-step programs. And so this idea of looking back over your day to see where you did well and where you didn't do so well and what you could do differently is a really powerful spiritual practice. And so I've, engaged in that for some time. I wouldn't say not every day, not consistently perhaps, but much more consistently in the last few years because we involve our whole family in that. Um,
Wow.
we have an exercise that we do at the end of the day. We do it most days. Sometimes we're too tired, or sometimes the kids just don't want to. But we call it rose, thorn, bud, and it's very simple. You look at your rose is what was the nicest thing that happened to you that day. And sometimes you might have more than one. So that's the rose. The thorn is a difficult one because it started off being something you didn't like about the day, but then it fell into blame. And so we've altered it a bit. So it's something that you didn't like that you did and you would like to do differently next time. So a word.
Oh, so it's really about, yeah, that I like that because indeed the thorn, when you talk about roses, thorns are part of the rose itself
Yeah,
as well. So
yeah,
I like that idea.
yeah. And then so the thorn, it can be quite challenging sometimes, but that's the important part. I think it's like recognizing what didn't go so well, what I did when I spoke
Mhm.
out of turn, I was rude or mean, or you know, or some of my actions was bullying or something. And then just to own that, and you can make an apology in the moment if it was to do with someone in the room. And you can say, next time that situation arises, this is how I might approach it. So it's taking it from that angle, right? So that's the thorn. And then the bud, of course, is what am I looking forward to tomorrow? And that's your bud. So it's a nice, simple structure. I can't remember where it came from. My wife introduced it to us. I'm not sure what its source is, but it's a retrospective, essentially, isn't it? Or an
Mm.
introspection. Part of retrospecting is introspecting. Um, and so I think that as a practice for yourself or for your family is very, very powerful. And there's examples, isn't there? I think there's something from something that Abraham Lincoln wrote that is basically a daily retrospective on how his day has been. I think it was Lincoln. So there's plenty of examples going way back in time. The Bible contains examples of this behavior as well, this desire to make things right before you move forward.
I
So
really like that idea, and indeed, I know a team that when other people look at that, they say like they don't do retrospective because they're not sitting together every two weeks or whatever the sprint is. But actually, at the end of their daily, they do something like that. It's like, okay, what happened yesterday that we could do better today? And so they
mm,
do some kind of introspection on on a daily basis. Like that's only 5 to 10 minutes, but that's of course improving a lot faster than every 2 weeks.
yeah,
It has the disadvantage because they sometimes forget or they had to add a kind of overview because of course if you do it on a daily basis you just look at the small chunks and sometimes you need to look at the larger things, so they had to add, I don't know, I think every 3 months that they're doing it now, for how could we improve at the time at a larger scale. But for me, it feels much more like the the idea of a retrospective. Like you say, we need to have that introspective part, and it's about us. Some of the things that we see, or at least that I see in retrospectives that are not going well, is that it's too much a blame game for people outside our team, or yeah, or kind of way we're doing good and this part is not good. So the introspection is so important. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's, yeah, I think it's really good for people to think hard about, okay, how much am I thinking about myself, and the thorn part that you say, okay, what else, or what did I do that wasn't so well that I could do better? And so when you say that you do that with your children, how long does it typically take for your small family? I assume it's a
Well,
small
this
family.
is with my second family. So I said, relationships and children are challenging for me. So I'm in my second, well, technically third marriage actually, because my first marriage was kind of a marriage of convenience, but I suppose it counts. But my second marriage was a real marriage, and I had two sons with that marriage, and that ended in 2007, really, I suppose, and then I remarried in 2011. Um, and well, I didn't
So
remarry.
you're already longer in this relationship than
Yeah,
in the previous one. So you are improving in a way.
yeah, it hasn't quite reached that number yet, I don't think. The first marriage lasted 14 years, and this one is currently on
Oh,
11.
okay.
So, um, but where was I going with this? Where was I going? Um,
I was asking about the how much time does it take in,
oh, how
and I
much
said,
time does it take? Yeah, well, at the end of the day, you mean how long do we spend on this?
yeah, how much
Yeah,
time you
my
spend? You
daughters.
said you don't.
Oh, yeah, that's where I was going. My daughters that I'm living with now are 8 and 10, and we've been doing this for a few years now. It's 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the day. It's not long. We get a bit distracted and go off on tangents sometimes. We do try to kind of hold it together, remember why we're saying the things we're saying. But really, it's 5 to 10 minutes exercise at the end of the day. It's probably one of the last things we do at night. Um, we're a family that reads the Bible every night, and so we'll do a Bible story, and then we will do our rose thorn bud. We have a lovely edition of the Bible for those who care about such things. It's 365 stories, so it's the scriptures divided up into 365 stories, designed for children to engage in. And so we'll read a story and we'll talk about what we learn from the story. Um,
Mhm.
I have a good friend, actually. You know him, I believe, Charles Louis, who does a lot of storytelling classes, and he'll take a story, a fairy tale usually, and that we've read, that we're all familiar with, and he'll read the story, and then he'll ask questions about it and begin to explore where are we in that story, or um, what does it feel like if you're this person, that person. So we do some of that kind of exploration around the stories, and why people behave in the way they behave, because there's some very strange stories in the Bible and very strange behaviors in there, and trying to understand why people do what they do is always an interesting conversation. So this is our evening routine. We do that, and then we do our kind of rose thorn bud to close off the day.
But it's wonderful how you combine a lot of these things. Like you said, well, we talked earlier about storytelling and everything about well, retrospectives in a way, the introspection part, but indeed using stories as examples about where we are, because I think that's mostly how the Bible was written, as also kind of storytelling to say,
Yes.
okay, and so it's really interesting when you look into that. Also, how they shaped history in the sense that when you look into which part did survive in the Bible that we now know, and others that were written originally but kind of forgotten, and things like that. But
Yeah.
it's really wonderful to see a lot of that coming back in yeah, as a whole. I really like that part. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you said, one of the questions was what drives you,
Mm.
and people. It is people for me. It's relationships and people that drives me forward. But it's specifically, I think it's broken people that drives me. I'm very attracted to people who are struggling in some way, and I think that's part of my attraction to particularly the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. It's a story of a, con- a people who continually fail and are drawn back to the path and continually fall off the path and get drawn back. And that's the whole story. It's continuously straying away from what they know to be the right thing to do. And there's something very attractive to me about that, because it is who I
Human.
am. It's so human. Yeah, it's so human. It's not stories of big heroes and things. It's stories of failure, and we're all in there. The way we behave and the things that drive us forward and the things we forget and lose sight of. It's also powerful, and I think that this, my previous work with kids who were excluded from school, or people who'd lost jobs and didn't know how to get back into work, is people struggling, because the people's who struggle, their stories are so much more interesting, and I think that's what I'm
Mm.
drawn to. I'm drawn to story. Whenever I
And I
meet
think
you, I want to
ma-
dig into their past and find out who they are and where they came from and why they're here. What's their map? That sort of.
well, we're all struggling one way or another, and there might be a few people who are so privileged that they're not struggling, but then they typically struggle about their privilege and not
It's
understanding
something,
it.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, the, when people are not struggling, I think most of us were struggling, or we're hiding that we're struggling, but that's a struggle on its own.
Yeah.
I think this is where it's interesting. It's not about being perfect; it's about how you deal with your struggles, because all of that we have that. And that's, yeah, probably a little bit easier when we grow up, or when we're a little bit older, to look back and say, okay, I thought that this or that person was not struggling. Now if I look back, I see where that person was struggling, and either I didn't see it, either that person was trying to hide it, or whatever. It's just, yeah, a lot there.
Mm.
Thanks for sharing all of these, because it's indeed, I'm here with the whole show. It's for me, for bringing the stories to learn about, yeah, who people are, and what are the stories behind them.
Yeah.
I want to move to that next question, about remote work. And well, all of us, we went remote with COVID a couple of years ago. Did you do any remote work before?
No, not at all. I was real a resistor. I had no desire. I remember being invited to a clean language conference that was all online. Judy Rees had been organizing it for years, and she became really good at this stuff. But I always said no, I didn't want to be part of that. I couldn't see any value in it, and it just felt wrong to me. And then when COVID hit, and all of my colleagues in the Scrum world were going online to run their trainings, I was appalled. I just thought, we should just stop. We shouldn't do this. This feels wrong. And so I said, okay, I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm going to take. I was actually planning a sabbatical anyway, even before this all happened. It was just happened a bit earlier. My plan was to, on the summer solstice, was to take 3 months off until the equinox, and it happened that lockdown in England happened on the day of the spring equinox. So I took
Mm.
my sabbatical for 3 months, and I just thought, well, in 3 months it'll be back to normal again, so I don't have to. But of course, it wasn't. And it was actually through talking to some good friends of mine, Charlotte being one of them, who had embraced this way of working, Kurt Petersen, someone else who had, and people I really trusted, and were giving me some ideas about how it might work. But I remember when lockdown first happened, I wrote a very strong piece on LinkedIn saying, Scrum should never be taught online, and I will never do this. And I had to eat my
Again,
words.
be taking that, yeah, that strong thing that you talked about before, that you had your strong opinions. And the interesting part is that,
Yeah, it's true.
if we look back at that, you had completely no experience online, so you were fighting against something that you didn't know. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely, yeah, it is. I was fighting against something I didn't know, and that there was, there was probably a certain degree of fear in that. It was the fear of the unknown. I didn't know what it was, but it was also something about this. Scrum for me is a very human to human interaction. It requires five senses, six senses, even if you like, and you don't get that in an online interaction. That's still true. I don't, I haven't changed that thinking about it. But I did discover something. I'll tell you the things I liked about doing the online training. It's that it takes away the corporateness of things, right? I've never liked going into corporations and training, running courses in the corporate world. So for years, I've been holding my workshops in community centres and churches and rooms above pubs and theatre spaces and stuff. Like I try to get people out of the corporate feel and into a community feel. Like if you're coming
Mm.
to an event room in a pub, it has a very different feel to going into a beautifully designed etc. venue space or something. But it changes the way people engage. But what I discovered online is that's that same thing, because look at you sitting there with your bookshelf where you can reach back and grab a book to talk to me about. And I started to realize there was massive potential in that. Um, and so I would encourage people not to blur their backgrounds or to have fake backgrounds, but just to let us see where they are and what they're doing, and use the environment in the workshop. So to introduce yourself, for example, you might say, look, find an object within arm's reach of you, and hold it up and use that to introduce yourself with. Or it might be, I would look at your screen and I would say, oh, Eve, what's that green book behind you? Can you pull that down and tell me about it? Right. So I'm getting some insight into your life through the camera, because the camera's in your home. And we've got cats jumping around or babies crying in the background in those days, didn't we? And people were
I,
trying to work.
I really like that example, because when things happen like that, especially in the beginning of COVID, people were kind of like apologizing for their world, and actually this was the most interesting part of, well, not the most, but it
Yeah,
was an interesting part. And most people who were watching the cats or the children or whatever, they didn't mind. They actually liked it, but the people who were the cats were jumping in. They were like, "Oh, what's happening? I look like corporate," in the way that you described it earlier on.
yeah,
Um, it's indeed one of the reasons why I like to use the real background for me. Sometimes people actually think it's a fake background, and then I grab a book about it and show people that. Well, just an example.
yeah.
I can't resist, and of course, this is one of the books that is on my shelf. So this is for we talked earlier about your book, so let's show it also. It is somewhere there displayed, because some of the books are displayed, but it was a little bit off camera. But I like that interaction. That's a very good tip about bringing people into their bring it in their home and see it
Yeah.
as some reality. And so, if you look back now after these years, how do you feel? Because we do have the option now to go to do trainings physically. So, do you combine? Do you do both, or did you
No,
completely go back
yeah, I
to it?
still haven't embraced the hybrid idea. I've tried that on a couple of occasions, and it just feels like you get the worst of both worlds. When you blend two good things, you rarely get a better thing. You've got to be highly skilled or in some magical space for that to happen. It's like when people say, can I do sort of waterfall and agile together? Yeah, of course you can, but why would you? You're going to get the
Mm.
worst of all of it. Waterfall has its place, and whatever defined process I'll call it has its place. It probably isn't the software world for it, but you try and blend it, it's just going to be a mess. So no, the hybrid thing hasn't worked. And you say we can go back and do in-person trainings, and technically we can, but you know what? It's much harder. It's much harder to get people to do it now. And other people have said the same thing. It's people have got lazy, or we just get more benefit from the online thing, or it takes less time or costs less money. I don't know what it is, but there's a few people who really do want in-person workshops, but it's still much harder to fill these workshops than it used to be, or not even to fill it, to get a decent number to make it viable, you know.
I've also heard that some people, trainers, say that the fact that I can do it online, I can, first of all, I can have people from all over the world because
That's
it
nice.
doesn't
Yeah, that's the
matter.
other aspect of it I like, the internationalism of it all.
What I also heard is that people were saying like I could now do training and spread it out over more days and just have 2 hours here or 3 hours and then another. So
Yeah,
the more breaks. And if you do a physical one, it's like 2 or 3 days or whatever the number of time you want to do all in a row because everybody has to get together. So it's a lot harder for people
yeah.
physically to do it in smaller chunks. Is that something that you play with as well, or how's
Yeah, that's definitely true. You know, when I very first started doing teaching Scrum classes online, I knew it had to be very different to what the in-person experience was. And so the first way I taught it, I spread the class over 4 weeks. So they would meet for 3 hours, 4 times, and in between they would form teams and build products. So we sort of simulated Scrum in that sense. You know, they would form teams on the first session, and I would set them a project to do, usually to build something, either software or graphic design thing, and they would work in their teams and call me for as a product owner to kind of like do some reviews there. Then we would come back in the next session and review the work, and so it was basically just sort of doing, and some amazing products were created in that time. But after a while, it started to get quite challenging to spread it out that far. So I was getting less and less people signing up for it. At first, it was good numbers of people, but there was a drop off certainly. And then these companies like Knowledge Hut, and there's a few different ones, I can remember what they're called, but they seem to sort of corner the market for online
Hmm.
classes now. For better or worse, I don't know. But I started partnering with one of those companies, and they fill the classes, so I don't have to do any of the promotional outreach work. I just have
Hmm.
to, do the class, and they've been some lovely experiences as well. They're either over 2 or 3 days sometimes, and I've made some, good connections through people doing those classes that if they've gone on to do more advanced work. And yeah, it's very interesting. And I'm working a lot with the American market, which I wouldn't be doing obviously in person. Um, so it's just different. The world is different today than it was pre-COVID. All my classes were in person. They would fill up. I would, be turning people away sometimes and say, can't, this class is full. You're going to have to sign up for the next one. Those days are gone, it seems, for me anyway. I don't know about others, but
But it's also interesting, like a little bit, like you said, you went in full. I think you can't hear me anymore.
no, I can.
Okay, I have recharged my headphones for a couple of minutes, so hopefully this works for a while. You hear me right
Yeah,
now?
I
And
can.
okay, yeah, that's the very first time. I thought my headphones charged last night, but apparently they didn't. So that was
Okay.
this is really very bad. But okay.
Well, you can edit this out, right? We can just.
Yeah, I will edit this out. So where were you? Now I forgot what you were.
Where were we? Remote working is what we were talking about.
Yes, you were talking about remote working. You were talking about so the fact that the whole world was different, and so the question I was asking or wanted to ask at that moment is that you were resisting the remote working. In a way, it's a little bit like what we see when resisting to change with many people. You've took a break. There were some people who gave you ideas on what things could be better. What if you look back now, after all of that, is there anything that you learned about yourself and the whole thing about that also works for when you teach people that are resisting to things like that? Because in a way, you did at some point decided, okay, I will still try it.
I did eventually say that. It took me some time though. So, what is the question? If what did I
Oh,
learn?
that's interesting. It took you some time. Is that something that you say that sometimes you need to give people time if they're resisting?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I actually learned that in regards to other people much earlier. When I first learned about Scrum, the company I was working in were not doing it, obviously, because nobody was really. But I was very excited about it, and I became an evangelist of Scrum. I would go around preaching and promoting and putting posters up and organizing talks and things. And I started to get the sense that people were like literally avoiding me
Mm.
because I was this mad prophet. I don't know what they thought. But it didn't go down that well. And it just started to annoy people, and turn people away, actually. And I think what it was is that it resonated so strongly with me, and it made so much sense because of my background in the arts and stuff. That this is, of course, how we ought to be working. Why on earth would anyone want to do this other stuff anymore once they know this? But that was me, and it wasn't other people, and other people's experiences were different. And people who've been a long time in the corporate world, you become very embedded with a way of thinking and working. And so it wasn't intuitive to other people. And it took me a while to realize that there was a lot of resistance to it, to the point where some people just would probably never want to do it. And I had to be okay with that. Why not? Why do I have to? I don't
Mm.
have to change the world. And so I started to work in a way that was more about attraction rather than promotion, and working with small teams and just kind of doing Scrum well and doing XP well, so people would kind of be curious and think, "Oh, can I do that? No, I want to learn."
Very similar how you did it yourself in a way with remote people probably kind of give you the time like, okay, Tobias is not interested, let him have his 3 months
Yeah,
sabbatical, whatever, and eventually you turned around and you said, well, let's give it a try, because some people that you trusted had some ideas and said things that probably said, oh, maybe I want to try.
yeah.
And
I mean,
if all of us we would have pulled on you and say you have to do this, maybe that would have created more resistance. Is that a correct?
uh, there was a bit of that, and one of the lists I was on, I decided to get off because I didn't want to hear any more about all this wonderful remote working that people were doing. But I remember in the early days of it getting kind of almost personally angry at people that I thought shouldn't be doing it who were doing it, and being very opinionated about it. And I regret that. I could have shut up a bit more. Because it didn't help me or them or anyone in the world really. So, but eventually, like you said, because I had enough curiosity to ask people I cared about, who I saw doing it, why they were doing it. So there were people that I didn't particularly care about or didn't know their work well enough to have an opinion, that I just thought, okay, well, they're probably doing it. It's probably not that good. But then these other people were saying, well, I'm trying this out. And I was like, oh, okay, let me learn a bit more about that. And I think so it sort of brought me into it a bit.
But thanks for sharing, because I think you have a very nice example of how people are resistant sometimes, and then when we give them time, and in a way 3 months is long, but it's not that long either, and sometimes people just need to figure it out. And yes, of course, the whole world was changing, everything was falling apart in one way or another, or we had to reinvent almost everything we did. So maybe that kind of helped you is a way, but still, it shows a lot about about the typical resistance we have inside companies. And yeah, I've noticed that I worked on my very first remote team in 2000, back in 2005, and I remember talking to my personal coach like, I'm doing agile, I'm doing remote, and it works. What am I doing wrong? As if it shouldn't work because whatever. And my coach, still remember to this day, my coach made me repeat that sentence probably like 20, 30 times until I realized, wait a minute, this is not about it shouldn't work. It's really about embracing what works and trying
Yeah.
to learn from it.
Yeah.
Um, but ever since, many people have tried to convince me that, yeah, my experience would not have been true and whatever. And it's like, no, it just, I was probably a lot lucky and I did some things right. And of course, it's also true that we have so much better tools than we had for example, when the Agile Manifesto was created 20 years ago. So the world has learned. We have some tools. And it still stays, like you said, it stays about people and their interactions, and how could we use the tools to get more interaction in a different kind of way.
Yeah. I was talking to someone recently who said, we were talking about the manifesto, and he said that he liked everything about it except one thing, and that's why he didn't become a signatory. And I said, what was the one thing you didn't like? And he said, face-to-face working is the best way of working. And I said, well, how can you say that's not? What would you prefer, like sending emails or something? And he said, no, but there are times when you don't have to be face-to-face with someone in order to get effective work done. Anyway, so it was interesting aside.
Yeah, but
But
it's in the interview I did with Alistair Coburn. He talked about his two sons who do a lot of remote work and resist to face to face, and it's interesting that even he's like, okay, yeah, I see my sons prefer some other things for multiple kind of reasons, and I think it's indeed like you say, there are moments that are this and that, and this is a very nice example. We're completely well, in not completely separate parts of the world. We're still more or less in Europe, depending on the definition of Europe, of course. But that's a different discussion. But we're far apart from each other, and we can still have a human interaction. And I think that is something that I value with remote work. Is we can do these things, but we have to make, I would say, things much more explicit. And try to take the time for stories like this, try to take the time, oh, let me teach you something or learn something about your environment, and things like that. So
yeah,
and we're still learning, I would say. I think a lot of the face-to-face interactions we've learned from basically kindergarten till we started working, we learned a lot of tricks that me as a 50-year-old, I haven't learned a lot remote. But if I see how my 16-year-old girl is interacting with her friends, that's, yeah, basically in the morning sending a small video chat to friends and then getting a video chat back. And like, this is a completely different way of thinking about the world
it
than I
is.
would.
Yeah, yeah. It's different, and who knows whether it's good or not? Time will tell, I suppose.
Well, they have to discover what they do in different kind of ways. Just like when I was young, I was using the telephone to call for hours to my friends, which was also sometimes strange to my parents. So we
Mm.
have to discover, and there's definitely bad parts about it, and hopefully some good parts. And yeah, people have to discover which parts are which. I think that's a little bit with all technologies and all ways of using the
It's
world.
interesting though, isn't it? When you look at your daughter, you say 16, so she was like 12 at the beginning of the lockdown thing, and so she sort of, and when this kind of technology has been around most of her life now, and so there's a sort of emerging into the technology as she grows up. For people like you and me, we learn a different way of behaving and interacting, and when we suddenly have to change what we know and what we feel safe with and what we feel comfortable with and do something different. And I think for me that's part of the challenge. I think for all of us it is, people that have one way of doing things. Same in the corporate world, we're very used to working in this way, and suddenly someone comes along and says, let's do it in a different way. It's threatening and overwhelming sometimes as well. So in a way, it was a lovely lesson to learn about how difficult change is.
Mm.
It's like I think of myself as a open-minded, person welcoming of new ideas, and it turned out I wasn't that open-minded and that open to new ideas. And I was quite closed and quite rigid and quite dogmatic and quite opinionated, very opinionated about it
Well,
all.
that's the interesting thing. I think in the agile world we sometimes talk about, yeah, you have I can't come up with the right learning mindset, so that people are learning. And I think we're actually, all of us, we have both sides. We have a closed mindset for
Yeah,
certain things, and we have a learning mindset for other things. And the trick is to, I would say, to see when are we in what parts.
yeah,
I've known that, for example, I've done a lot of training about learning how to draw. And I know that by now, I know that I have physical limitations for drawing stuff. So I'm like, okay, I spend hours and hours of trying to do stuff. So I've noticed that now this is not for me. And I could probably spend 100 more hours to do that, but it won't bring as much value that it brings for most people. It's like at that level, at this level, I don't want to learn anymore. Which is a kind of, I would say, closed mindset, but a designed one, in the one that I say I've tried it. I've known the limitations for myself, because I have a difficulty with, I would say, a link, or a missing link between my eyes and my hand. So just physically really hard part. And like, okay, that part I won't inspire much more to go into that. And then you have people like Charles Louis and a few others who are like, yeah, but we can draw and I can teach you. Well, some of them tried and it didn't work, and some like, okay. And there's other things that I want to keep exploring. And I think all of us, we have a lot of that. And like you say, you think about yourself that you're open-minded. Like I would say, I think most people think that way until they discover, hey, in that part, I'm actually not that open-minded.
yeah.
I want to move to that. Oh, you wanted to add something to that?
No, that's good. That's enough on that topic, I think.
I want to move to this question. What do you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
Oh gosh. Did we miss out the bit about the last book? Was that coming up?
Well, we already talked about the
Talked
book.
about
You
a few
talked about
books.
it in the,
Yeah,
yeah, and you talked already about that book very much in the beginning. That's why I thought let's skip it
let's skip
again. So
over.
that's why I thought
Yeah,
let's talk about that question you want me to ask. And this is one I'm particularly almost very interested in the answers, but with you especially, I was like, I can't even imagine what kind of direction this would go,
uh,
especially after this conversation. So. But
you
maybe
know,
that's one of these
I don't know if
questions
you
that,
should ask this question on a podcast, but I'm always fascinated um, about scars, people's scars, and I think like the scars on our body are an they are an actual embodiment of our story, aren't they? And I think that there's something really interesting when you start having conversations with people about their scars. It can be deeply personal, or it can be funny, or it can be very revealing of some experience they've had. But of course, on a podcast, for one, you can't see people's
mm,
scars. But I don't. But there's physical scars, but there's also other kinds of scars that we have, marks that we have. So it's almost like what are the markers of your life? Maybe that might be a way of thinking about
mm,
it. What is the in storytelling? There's the um, until one day moment, right? So everything is
mm,
moving along in a certain way, and then suddenly there's something happens, and it shifts us. It shifts the course of our life. And I'll give you an example of that, right, from a story that I heard in a class that I was running. Um, this person worked in a mining town and was expected to become a miner like all his family had been. And then Margaret Thatcher comes into power and closes all the mines down. And so suddenly
mm,
these lines of unemployed people. And he joins the line of unemployed people. He's young, he's 16 or something. He's not gonna get the job he thought he was going to get. So he's lining up to collect his dole money. And the lines get bigger every day because more and more mines are closing down. And to the point when he goes to queue up to get his dole money, and the line's even longer than usual. So he's at the back of the line, and now the line has gone, past the normal places he stands, and it's outside a shop, and the shop is a computer shop. And he's never really thought or seen anything about computers before, but the shop's open and he starts to talk to the guy who's running the shop, and he starts to learn a little bit about computers, and he becomes hooked on the idea, and he says, how can I do this? And so the guy kindly kind of invites him to try out a few of the games and whatever it is he's doing in there. Anyway, the long and short of it is he becomes a computer programmer, and his life changes around, and he's telling this story, in his late 40s or 50s or something like that. But it's this moment of life. It's just, you call it a scar, or a moment of revelation or something. Something big happens that marks you. He was marked by that moment, and it forever changed him. And we all have moments like that, moments of meeting a particular person who says something to us, or finding ourselves in a strange situation that makes us rethink everything. And I think that, I don't know how you could formulate a question around that, but it's, to me, it's almost like I get into the idea of drawing life maps. What does our life map look like? What are the key moments? I've been studying this thing called counter mapping recently, which is the idea of being able to draw a map that's meaningful to you rather than meaningful to the people that conquered your land. And if we think of ourselves as our land, and who's conquered us, and who tells the story of our life, and what if we tell the story of our life in a way that's really personal to us and not trying to impress people. A resume is a story of a life, but it's a fake story. It's a story that we're told to tell about us by the powers that be, if you like. Tell your story in a resume and impress people, but that's not my story.
Mm.
My story is way more interesting than that. Way more broken, way more pathways, and getting lost and found again and stuff. And so I don't know how you can ask that question, but something around that, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I really like how you bring that, because indeed we talked about storytelling, and indeed that's the scars and the things, the markers in our life, how you call it. This is really where the stories are around. And in an interview, in a job interview, you want people to stand out, you want to remember them. And if it's just a CV and just the things that, okay, there, there is not, most people then don't stand out. It's okay, what did you do in that job, and why did you do it? What did you learn? Where did you screw up? Where did, yeah, that these
Yeah.
are the interesting parts, because I want to learn what will happen when we work with. One of the questions I sometimes ask is, okay, what will happen if we disagree? How will I know? Will you shut up and just disappear? Will you, I don't know, go away, or will you fight against me? And or yeah, is there a way we will figure things out? And that is usually told in stories.
Yeah.
That is-
What was the name? There was a guy, his name escapes me. He would tell stories of his failures. He was one of the first people to do it at the Agile conferences. He used to stand up and tell the stories of his failures. My 10 worst failures of the last year or something like that. I can't remember his name, who was, but that always impressed me, that he would get up and do that. Because like you said, that's where the real learning occurs, isn't it? In those moments, when you can have the courage to share that. And the more people do that, it's become, in our world now, I think people are quite comfortable with telling stories of failure. Whereas I think back then, 15 years ago, not so much. People
I was,
wanted it to be
yeah,
successful. They wanted Agile to be successful, have the success stories and the case studies. And here he is standing up and saying, well, screwed up in this way and I screwed up in that way. And yeah, it's so
yeah.
refreshing.
That is. I tried at some point to create a kind of session around the failures, uh, but I also found that it was hard to do that, because I didn't want to talk about the negative parts of my clients. And I was like, okay, how could I talk about the failures, about the lessons, without blaming certain companies? And yeah, I found that hard to do it in a respectful way, that people didn't feel offended, because sometimes in the corporate world, people don't want you to talk openly out about, yeah, the problems they had, which is interesting because all the companies have problems, all the things. This is why they hire us to help us in a way, and it's
But
always
this is
interesting
this
to
is a
see.
similar thing, isn't it? It's maybe that's the question. It's about where was your biggest failure or something? Because
Mm.
Rainsborough, his name was Rainsborough or something. Anyway,
GB Rainsberger.
yeah, that was him. Yeah. Um, what was
It's
his?
one of the people that I've interviewed. For these who are interested, that's the longest interview I've had, more than 3 hours. So
Oh,
that's a very long one because of stories like that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I used to enjoy meeting him at the conferences. I didn't really know him beyond that. Never worked with him, but yeah, he was an inspiration. But yeah, there's stories of there's the scars, aren't they? Really, that we get on our journeys to be what we are and to be great. I suppose really we have to
Mm.
go through those moments and
And
yeah,
it shows, and I think you shared a lot of vulnerabilities already in this talk as well about, okay, the marriages, the difficulties with parenting and with relationship, but also about, indeed, I'm not sure if I want to go into remoting and then learning. I was not that open minded. I thought, for me, these are the interesting stories where we learn so much about others, because indeed sometimes in the agile world, some of the in the beginning, the agile coaching was the whole life will be better. No, that's just fake. I mean,
yeah.
it's there is a lot to learn, and what are the struggles we have. So thank you for sharing that. I want to move to that almost last question. Who do you think I should also ask you? Who do you think I should invite?
Well, the person that I've mentioned is on my mind. Yasmina, her name is, and she's an interesting character. She started something called Agile Humans in Belgrade, Serbia. So she's a
That
Serbian-based.
should be her, I think. Yeah, right.
Uh,
Is this correct?
hold on, I'm off screen for a moment. That's her. Yes,
I
yeah.
need to
Um,
bring my own camera back.
she has a long history in politics in Serbia. Very interesting, worth reading about. But more
Mhm.
recently, she's focused on building up this agile community in Belgrade and runs conferences there and workshops and invites people over. I've been over there a couple of times now, and other colleagues of mine have been there. But Yasmina recently just finished actually and is about to launch the Serbian translation of the People's Scrum. So I'm excited about that. So obviously,
Wow.
yeah. So that's great, and I've known her for several years now. We met at, I think she was a student on a colleague's, Nigel Baker's CSM class that I sat in as an observer back in 2006 or 7. And she was a student there, and I got talking to her. She'd come over from Serbia to do the class, and she was at that time she was working in academia and was looking to how to introduce Scrum in academic world, and that was kind of a new thing for me. So we got talking, and then I invited her to attend this event in Phoenix, Arizona called Scrum Beyond Software in 2010. And she came to that, and then we've just sort of been friends and colleagues since. And she's doing lots of interesting things, and I definitely think she's someone with some wonderful stories that you do well to chat with her, I'd say.
And yeah,
There's
that's
a lot
one
of
of
other
the things I
people
like.
I recommend
That,
too. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, the thing, one of the things I like is by doing this and having other people invite is that we also well, it's not that I'm not interested about the big names in the agile world and that people know, because like you, many people know you and you have very interesting stories that maybe not everybody knows. So this is what I like about it. But on top of that, people like you invite, and yeah, people who are maybe a lot lesser known but are at the outer boundaries doing it in a very different way, different environment. Someone with a political background that in a country that I completely don't know anything about.
Right.
definitely, I hope that will bring a lot of interesting stories.
Yeah.
You said you wanted to add something to that before I
Well, I
interrupt
was
you.
just saying that there, when you asked that question, there quite a few people came to mind, and I think one of the joys of this kind of work is um, to be influenced by people who come after you. We talk a
Mm.
lot about the people that came before you, standing on the shoulders of giants and all that, but there are people that have been, students of mine who become inspirations to me, and I always find that a very joyous thing. And the other person, I might as well mention him, that I was going to recommend or will recommend is a man called Gabor Batira. He's a Hungarian agile coach. He lives in the UK. Does and runs these wonderful facilitation sessions on Hungarian literature. Absolutely
Mm.
beautiful stuff, bringing poetry and storytelling into these workshops, and getting people to explore in really interesting ways. Yeah, very, very lovely. And yeah, he's always got, kind of an interesting take on things. And he's someone I love working with, and I always enjoy his company. And it's this idea that, we can stand on the shoulders. I don't know what would be the opposite of standing on the sitting at the feet of some of a student. It's this two-way, this lovely kind of multi-way learning situations that we can develop in
I,
facilitated classes.
I really like that because indeed I like to learn a lot from the people who originally come up with something because I've learned to grasp the details on some of that.
Yeah,
But teaching, for me, the main reason of doing teaching is I usually learn as much from the students as I can bring. And that's for me one of the joys in teaching is that when I do stuff and I am there, that I'm open to listen about their situation, about how they are doing it before or what they've learned with it. That is where, for me, most of the joy is in learning and in teaching. Um, but like you said earlier on, you have to be open for some of these things, and there might be moments that we're not open, or at least I've recognized it myself. But when we can learn from the people that moved on, yeah, I've done a class with some people that are now moved on. Charles Louis is one of these people that I've I don't know if I met him at the start of his career, but I definitely at the beginning. Yeah, I learned a lot about him, and he's moved on in all kinds of directions, way ahead of me for many different kind of things. And
yeah,
it's always nice to see people like that, indeed, moving on, and you teach them a little bit, and they take it to parts of like, wow, okay, I didn't even think that was possible.
yeah,
Um, um, and
yeah,
but at the same time, I do think in many cases, I recognize some kind, a little bit that spark, that drive that you have. I recognize that sometimes in my classes that I see, whoa, this person, the way he's interacting, he's grabbing, learning things. You see almost like how they are a sponge grabbing and learning things. Is that something you recognize as well when
yeah,
you have someone
definitely.
in the
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's something about it's like a wide-eyed wonderment that people have. You just see it, and it's so attractive. It just draws me in, and I think that they're like you said, this absorbing this information, but not to regurgitate it, to reinvent it.
Exactly, that's the
Yes.
word.
And
Yes.
they're going to do something really exciting with it, and I don't know what that is yet. Yeah, it's an exciting moment. It is when you see that in a class. Yeah,
Mm,
definitely.
thank you for bringing that up. It's indeed that thing. Okay, we've been talking for almost 2 hours now. We said let's limit it. Um, if people want to reach out to you, what would be a good way for reaching out to you?
Um, well, I have a website which is easy to find because it's just my name with a .uk
Mm.
at the end. But I'm also on LinkedIn.
And
Um,
I did prepare the LinkedIn. I think that's the LinkedIn.
that's the LinkedIn. Yep. It is.
I didn't think about your website, which is very strange because I usually do that with people.
All
But
right.
yeah, I will definitely add your these links to the show notes. We talked about lots of books that I will add links to as well, and then the links to the people that we talked about as well.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time because it's wonderful to have these kind of conversations on a Saturday morning,
Yeah.
to just have really going deep into your life in a way, and a lot of the things that inspired you, or that how you inspire others. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. No, it was a lovely conversation. I enjoyed it tremendously. It was really, really great to engage with you. Good to see you again after a long time. Yeah. Thank you. I shall be in your town actually. I think it's in the spring. There's an event happening there that brings me to Ghent. So I shall look.
Hmm. I'm looking forward to, I have no idea what event you're talking about, but
I think
there's a lot of
it's a regional Scrum gathering, I believe, organised by
ah
some people.
now I really have this is very interesting. I'm not sure if I ever said it on camera. For whatever strange reason, I've never been to Scrum Gathering, but it's not on purpose. It's just agenda wise, it never felt. And just we're recording this at the beginning of October. There was the Scrum Gathering in Amsterdam just last week, I think.
There was. I
And
was there.
I was planning to go there, and again, agenda wise, it totally didn't fit
Well, you
for
know what it is?
me.
You had to wait for them to bring it to you. You
And so now I have no excuse anymore. So now if it's actually in Ghent, I
yeah,
have to really figure this out, and block my agenda in all kind of ways to make sure that I can make that.
yeah,
That would indeed be
yeah.
okay. Well, anyway, it like you said, it's been wonderful to spend this time together with you,
Thank
and
you.
let's indeed meet in Ghent
Thanks again.
in a couple of months.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.